A man pedaled his entire house across a Seattle parking lot last winter, and it took him about the same effort as towing a kid in a bike trailer. The house weighed 60 pounds. It had a bed, a shelf, a skylight, and a door that locked from the inside. It cost about $150 in materials, most of it corrugated plastic, the same stuff political yard signs are made of. And when a city cleanup crew showed up at the lot where he had been staying, the crew that hauls tents and pallet shelters straight to the dump, he did something no one living in a tent can do. He got on his bike and rode his home away. That one moment explains why a growing number of Americans have started converting old bicycles, cargo trikes, and secondhand bike trailers into tiny mobile homes for homeless people. They finally found the loophole in a system that keeps destroying everything else. And by the end of this video, you will know exactly how they build one, where the bikes come from, and why it costs less than a week of groceries. To understand why that loophole matters so much, you need to see the problem the way the people on the street see it. Encampment sweeps have become a routine of city life in America. A notice gets taped to a tent, and 72 hours later, a crew arrives and everything gets loaded into a dump truck. The tent, the blankets, the family photos, the ID card a person needs to apply for housing in the first place. And in 2024, the Supreme Court's ruling in Grants Pass gave cities even more power, making it legal to fine and even jail people simply for sleeping outside, even when no shelter beds are available. That ruling landed on a country where, on the night of the most recent federal count, roughly 745,000 people had nowhere to call home, and about 1 in 5 of them was a child. I have covered this pattern before on this channel. Elvis Summers built beautiful wooden tiny homes in Los Angeles, and sanitation workers confiscated them right off the sidewalk. Volunteers in Portland built pallet shelters that lasted through 2 winters of rain, and cleanup crews treated them as debris. Every shelter that sits still eventually gets a notice taped to its door. But a bicycle is not a structure. A bicycle is a vehicle. A trailer hitched to a bicycle is a vehicle load. There is no zoning code for a bike, no building permit, no 18-month approval process, and in most cities, no legal mechanism to confiscate one that is being actively used and moved. The people who figured this out were not lawyers. They were tinkerers with garages full of scrap, and the story of how they cracked it starts with a retired boat builder north of Seattle. Paul Elkins spent years working with his hands before he ever thought about homelessness. He built boats, worked fabrication jobs, and became the kind of guy who cannot look at a flat sheet of material without imagining what it could fold into. Sometime around 2010, he built himself a tiny aerodynamic camper that hitched to the back of an ordinary bicycle. It looked like a teardrop trailer that had been shrunk in the wash. The walls were coroplast, corrugated plastic sheeting, the fluted material that weighs almost nothing but resists rain, wind, and sun. Inside there was a sleeping platform, storage cubbies, a small counter, a vent, and a windowed hatch. He rode that thing on long tours, camping in it night after night, refining every detail the way only a person who actually sleeps in his own designs can. And then he looked at the tent encampments spreading through the Puget Sound region and had the same realization that Elvis Summers had in Los Angeles and that a retired welder named Earl Briggs had in Kansas. He was sitting on a solution. Elkins designed a micro-shelter version of his bike camper specifically for homeless people, a folding coroplast pod that one person could assemble with a utility knife, a drill, and zip ties. Materials came in somewhere between $150 and $300 depending on what could be scavenged. It was waterproof, windproof, lockable, and light enough to tow behind a donated bicycle or even pull by hand. Then he did the thing that turned a clever design into a movement. He gave the plans away. He published his measurements, posted build videos, and told anyone who asked to copy the design freely. No patent, no licensing fee, no brand, just a folding pattern for a house, released into the wild. What happened next was never organized by anyone. The plans passed hand to hand, garage to garage, the way people have always traded the knowledge that keeps their neighbors alive. A retired machinist in Denver downloaded the measurements and built 4 of them in his workshop over a single winter. He worked on them the way other retired men work on classic cars, out in the garage every morning with the radio on, except that when each one was finished, he hitched it to his own bicycle and towed it across the city to an encampment near the South Platte River. He would ride up, hand over the key to the little padlock, shake the person's hand, and pedal home with an empty hitch. He never asked for anything, and he never gave his name. The people at the river camp just called him the Bike Man. A church group in Sacramento held a build day where volunteers who had never cut coroplast in their lives finished 6 shelters before dinner, following Elkins' folding pattern taped to the fellowship hall wall like a sewing template. And a high school shop class in Oregon built one as a semester project and donated it, along with a refurbished mountain bike from the local bike co-op, to a man who had been sleeping under a highway overpass for 2 years. The students voted to add things the plans never called for: a coat hook, a reading light, a small shelf sized for a paperback book. When they wheeled it out to him, the man walked around it twice without saying anything, then asked if he was allowed to sit inside. Allowed. That word stayed with the teacher for weeks. And that bike co-op detail matters more than it sounds, because the bicycle half of this equation turned out to be even easier to solve than the shelter half. America is drowning in unwanted bicycles. Police departments auction off thousands of unclaimed stolen bikes every year for a few dollars each. Transfer stations and landfills pull working bikes out of the trash by the truckload. Community bike shops in Portland, Minneapolis, Chicago, and Los Angeles have entire back rooms of donated frames waiting for someone to want them. A volunteer who wants to build a mobile home for a homeless neighbor can usually get the bicycle for free and the trailer wheels off a curbside jogging stroller. The build itself follows a pattern that has been refined through hundreds of garage experiments, and it breaks down into 3 parts that almost anyone can manage over a weekend. The first part is the trailer. Start with a flatbed bike trailer, either a heavy-duty cargo model bought second-hand or a homemade frame welded from electrical conduit and old bike forks. The one rule the experienced builders repeat to every newcomer is to check the wheel weight rating before anything else, because a house that collapses its own wheels 10 blocks from the garage helps nobody. The second part is the shell. Some builders fold it from coroplast the way Elkins does, scoring the fold lines with a utility knife and locking the panels together with zip ties, a method so simple that the Sacramento church volunteers finished their first one in under 4 hours. Others frame a small plywood box with a peaked roof, essentially a miniature version of the tiny homes volunteers build in Seattle, scaled down to what a person can actually pedal. The plywood version weighs more and costs more, but it survives a decade instead of a couple of years, so groups building for cold, wet cities tend to choose it. The third part is the interior, and this is where the builds get personal. The baseline is a sleeping pad, hooks for clothing, a battery lantern, and a milk crate bolted down as a nightstand. From there, builders add what they would want themselves: a small mirror, a phone charging pouch, reflective tape along the back panel so drivers see the trailer at night. The whole thing rolls on 2 bicycle wheels, weighs between 60 and 120 pounds depending on materials, and can be towed by an average adult on flat ground without much trouble. Total cost runs between $150 and $500. For comparison, Los Angeles reportedly spent around $130,000 per unit on one of its tiny home programs, and the average wait for permanent housing placement in that city has stretched to 867 days. A volunteer with a free weekend closes that same gap for the price of a grocery run. But the real advantage of a bike home has nothing to do with cost. It has to do with what mobility actually means when you are homeless. A tent pins you to one spot. If the day labor jobs are across town, you either abandon your belongings and risk losing everything, or you skip the work. A bike home moves with you. One man in Fresno, who received a converted cargo trike from a volunteer group, described pedaling his entire life to a construction site at dawn, parking it where he could see it, working a full shift, and pedaling home to wherever home happened to be that night. He said having wheels under his bed was the difference between surviving and participating. For the first time in 3 years, he could say yes to work without gambling everything he owned. There is a safety layer to it too. People sleeping outside learn quickly that danger finds whoever stays in one place too long. A bike home lets someone relocate in 10 minutes when an encampment turns volatile, when a sweep notice appears, or when winter wind shifts and the spot behind the warehouse becomes a wind tunnel. The home goes where the person needs to be, instead of the person being trapped where the home is. And in winter, that mobility becomes a survival tool in itself. A person in a tent has to endure whatever weather arrives at the spot where their tent is staked. A person with a bike home reads the city the way a sailor reads the water. When a cold front rolls in, they move to the south side of a building, out of the wind. When freezing rain is coming, they park under a bridge or an awning for the night. One outreach volunteer in Minneapolis said her bike camper clients treated the weather forecast like a bus schedule, checking it every evening and repositioning before dark. That is not a small thing in a city where exposure kills people every single winter. Now, the one thing a thin plastic or plywood shell cannot do is generate heat. And this is where I want to pause for a second, because the builders in this video tuck one specific item inside every bike camper before they hand over the keys, and it solves the exact problem a rolling shelter cannot solve on its own. It is called the TerraShell. It is a thermal bivvy that turns a person's own body heat into the heating system for the whole pod. The reflective lining bounces warmth back instead of letting it bleed through the plastic walls. So on a freezing night, the inside of that little shelter holds a pocket of warm air with no batteries, no fuel, and nothing to break. It folds down to the size of a coat pocket and costs under $20, which is why so many of you told me after the last video that you keep a few in the car to hand out in your own town. If you want to do the same or send one to a builder group near you, the link is in the description below. And living inside one of these rolling shelters has taught the builders things no engineer would ever think to test. Daily life inside a 15-square-foot rolling shelter is a masterclass in making small things work hard. Builders learned fast that coroplast walls sweat. One person breathing all night inside a sealed plastic pod creates condensation that drips back down by morning. So every good design includes a vent near the roofline. Usually a simple flap that stays cracked open even in rain. They learned that the floor matters more than the walls, the same lesson pallet shelter builders and storage unit dwellers discovered, because cold rising off the ground steals more body heat than wind ever will. So the sleeping platform sits raised with a layer of foam board underneath. They learned to paint the roofs light colors for summer, because a dark plastic box in Phoenix in July becomes an oven by 9 in the morning. They also learned that the shelter needs a flat spot on top, because a person's morning coffee has to sit somewhere. that the door should open toward the sidewalk side, not the street side, so nobody steps out into traffic half asleep, that a small dry erase board mounted by the door lets outreach workers leave messages, appointment times, job leads, a note that someone came by. And then there is the woman in Portland, because her story is the one that explains what all of this hardware is actually for. She spent 11 months living in a bike camper after losing an apartment she had rented for 9 years. She was in her 60s. She had never slept outside in her life before the week her building sold. Inside her camper, she kept a strip of battery-powered fairy lights strung along the ceiling, a curtain she sewed by hand from a thrift store pillowcase, and a photograph of her granddaughter taped above the shelf. She told a volunteer that the days were hard, but the nights were hers. When she clicked those lights on and pulled the door shut, the space stopped being a box on a trailer and became her room. Her word, not mine. Her room. And she kept a routine most housed people would recognize. Coffee on the flat spot on the roof in the morning, the dry erase board checked for messages, the bed made every single day because she said a made bed was proof to herself that she was still somebody who made her bed. Of course, the cities noticed, and the pattern you would expect from every previous video in this series started to repeat itself. But this time, it hit a wall. In one West Coast city, a cleanup crew tagged a row of bike campers for removal during an encampment sweep, and the crew supervisor had to radio his office when the owners simply mounted their bikes and pedaled the campers off the lot while he stood there holding removal stickers with nowhere to put them. There was nothing abandoned to seize, nothing was affixed to the ground. There was no structure. There were just cyclists leaving. Some cities have tried to respond with parking-style ordinances, rules about how long a bike trailer can remain stationary on public property. But enforcing a time limit against a vehicle that exists specifically to move is like ticketing the tide. The builders had finally created a shelter the system did not know how to destroy. That does not mean bike homes are the answer to homelessness, and the builders are the first to say so. A bike camper is a bridge. It has no plumbing, no shower, no kitchen, but here is what the bridge does. It keeps a person dry, warm, and rested while they wait out the 867 days. It keeps their documents from being landfilled in a sweep, and losing your ID is one of the single biggest reasons people stay stuck in homelessness, because you cannot apply for housing, benefits, or work without it. It keeps their dignity intact, because there is a real difference between being a person the city keeps displacing and a person with a home and a way to move it. And in a handful of cities, the bike home builders and the village builders I covered in previous videos have started joining forces. A managed shelter site in the Pacific Northwest set aside a corner of its lot as overnight parking for bike campers, with access to the site's bathrooms, laundry, and caseworkers. Residents pedal out during the day to jobs and appointments, and pedal back at night to a fenced, lit, safe place to sleep. The staff there noticed something the numbers do not capture. The bike camper residents transitioned into services faster than almost anyone else, and one caseworker had a theory about why. She said the hardest part of her job is finding people. Appointments get made and missed because someone got swept to the other side of the city. Her bike camper clients never missed appointments. They rode to her office. The woman with the fairy lights was one of them. 14 months after she first pulled that camper door shut, she signed a lease on a small apartment. The volunteer who helped her move said she packed the fairy lights first. So how are Americans turning old bikes into tiny mobile homes for homeless people? One garage at a time, with a jigsaw, a stack of coroplast, and a bicycle pulled from a police auction. Paul Elkins looked at a folded sheet of plastic and saw a bedroom that could outrun a dump truck. A machinist in Denver spent his winter building homes he would tow across town and give to strangers. A high school shop class handed a man the first key and the first set of handlebars he had held in 2 years. Which brings us back to that Seattle parking lot. The cleanup crew finished their sweep that morning. The tents went into the truck, the pallet shelters went into the truck, and the man with the 60-pound house pedaled out of the lot, past the crew, and disappeared down the block with everything he owned rolling behind him. That lot is empty now. His home is somewhere else tonight, exactly where he needs it to be, and there is nothing anyone can tape a notice to. If this video opened your eyes, hit subscribe, because next week I am covering another story the cameras usually miss. And click the video on screen right now. What those communities figured out connects directly to what you just watched. I will see you there.